Hello, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome to this conversation, this preview of something that amazing Gretchen Miura and I are putting together for you. Hi, Gretchen.
Hi, Sarah.
How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
So what we want to introduce to you today is a project that we've been working on since Gretchen appeared on my podcast, but I think it started to weave its magic in the background long before that, when we were in many, many conversations over the last 2 years. And what it is, it's called the Lighthouse Circle, and it is a grief support community for people to come together in a circle with this place as a lighthouse for people who are in grief
Mm.
or mourning, and creating some kind of program together to create this sacred and loving and accepting space for people to grieve about who they want, how they want, but with the guidance and the holding. How would you say that? The
Yeah, I think our deepest desire is to hold space for
uh-huh.
people to come and feel that they can grieve
Yeah.
in whatever way that suits them.
Yeah, I love that. In any way that suits you. And we're going to tell our own stories about this later, which will make this way, way more evident of what we mean by whatever way is good for you.
Mm.
So this is, like I said, it's a grief support community. It's a circle. It's a place where we all get to come and create some structure, because one thing we noticed was both Gretchen and I have a background as Roman Catholics as we were growing up, but both of us let that go at some point. And many of you may be in a similar situation, in that we let, when you let go something like that, you let go the rituals, you let go the support, you let go the community, you let go the pillar, the way to do things. There's so many rituals involved in that. And let me be very clear, we're not starting a church here or a religion, but the amazing thing about Gretchen is she actually lives on a temple in the northwest of Japan, quite a remote place, in a prefecture called Akita. Her husband is the priest there. She lives there with him and the 4 children and her in-laws. And so she's involved in the daily ritual of everyday life in the community, which of course means hundreds of funerals, cleaning gravestones, looking after people in their grief, and understanding that. And Japan does that really, really, really well. But of course, neither she or I are priests, Buddhist priests, Shinto priests, or anything like that. But what we are is two people who noticed a need, or noticed I don't know, noticed a wish to create a lighthouse and a circle for people to come together and grieve in whatever way they want to together, but also making our offers as who we are. I'm a life coach, an executive coach, and a facilitator. And I've taken a lot of my clients, especially long-term clients, through, well, their parents or friends have died during the time that I've been with them, or there's kind of this consistent grief that keeps coming up to the surface, even for long held grief. And that may be something we talk about a bit later as well. So that's who I am. I'm a systems coach. So I understand that in the systems, still things are present. So what I mean by in the systems, things are still present, is even when somebody's gone 20 years ago or something like that, their presence is still felt and in our systems. And I think what religion and what Japan certainly does very well is create some kind of physical presence for that person, so that we can honor them. And perhaps that might be something that you want to do if you join this community. um, Gretchen, over to you.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, as Sarah mentioned, I live in northern Japan, and I am part of a family, temple family. My husband is a Zen priest, so I do work there with him. And I'm also a mindfulness meditation teacher. And I also have experienced grief myself. And I always feel like the programs I'm drawn to make are the ones that I wish I had in my life. So this is a community that I probably would have been seeking, throughout my life. And it's meant to be quite sort of integrated in the sense that we're going to have these type of calls. We're going to have meetings on Zoom so people can connect with one another. It's going to be kept small, right? And I was really hoping to keep it over a 6-month period so we can sort of get to know each other and go deeper.
Mm.
And so there's going to be sort of a wide ranging sort of various different approaches, different conversations on grief. And the guiding principles are mindfulness, community, and the value of ritual in creating sort of a supportive, integrated approach to grieving. So I'm just going to sort of break that down a little bit. So my background is Zen and mindfulness is just being present, being aware in the present moment without judging. So I know on my own grief journey, this has helped because you can just sort of say, okay, this is what's here right now for me. This is what's coming up. And sort of creating more spaciousness around it, just sort of allowing the emotions, the feelings, the body sensations, the thoughts to sort of be there. So you can sort of work through the grief and the sadness and the loss. And so I would be starting each meeting with a guided meditation. And there's no prerequisite for having any experience with meditation or adhering to any type of dogma or belief system. It's very open. And as Sarah and I've talked about, it's really just quieting your mind. It's just having a time to sort of go inward, quiet your mind, and connect with yourself. And then community, which is so important to both Sarah and I. And that's why we chose the word circle for the name. So a circle is sort of people coming together, even visually, you can imagine sort of feeling held by one another. And a Buddhist word that I like to use sometimes is Sangha. And it means you're sort of on the same path. So Sarah and I would be very much on the same path as everybody who's joining this group. So we're walking on this path, this very terrible, difficult path together to simply support each other, which again is the reference to the lighthouse, just sort of this sort of stable light saying, I'm here for you. And there's sort of lighthouses all over the world, right? So you're on this rough shore and you can see that lighthouse and you think, okay, I know where there's refuge. I know where there's the shore. And that's what we would like to offer, is just sort of a stable presence, someone that can hold the space, but also be with you on that journey.
Refuge. I love that word, refuge.
Yeah.
Is a beautiful word. And it can be, the lighthouse also has so many different functions, right? It's a warning. It's like, here you are. But it's also, if you end up on the rocks, then we're the ones who can come and get you out and hold you for the while we get the boat back off the rocks, and get you on again, or we find another way to get you off the lighthouse. Yeah.
And there's something very humble about a lighthouse too. We are not, it is important to say, I'm a mindfulness meditation teacher. And while I have a lot of experience through the temple, I'm not a trained therapist.
Same.
So I want to just clarify that. And there's also a lot of humility that I've walked on this path myself, and it never really ends. Grief never ends. And I just really want to be humble and saying, I'm here, I'm going to show up. I want to be stable and reassuring and sort of that light sometimes in the darkness. And then ritual. I just want to touch on ritual, which is something that Sarah, I think, really importantly alluded to. We all have rituals from our backgrounds, from our childhoods, and then we sort of, continue them or let them go. I actually have learned a lot from living in Japan because there's such a important focus on ancestors and how we honor our ancestors. And I just feel like I've grown so much from learning through that. But again, we each know how to grieve. So each person's going to have different rituals that sort of works for them. So this is an open invitation to sort of say what rituals create structure and help as you grieve, right? So it doesn't have to be the rituals that mean something to me. But again, in the community, we can sort of share different rituals, because a ritual sort of, again, it is an anchor. It is a refuge. It's like, oh, I can rely on this. This is going to help me get through this very, very difficult time. And so I feel sometimes that, into adulthood, we lose those rituals. And it's nice. Again, we're not creating a church or religion, but it's like rituals can be secular, they can be spiritual, they can be whatever they are for you. as long as they help you and offer sort of some guidance and refuge for you. So those are sort of the three guiding principles that just sort of is what driving sort of the elements of this. And then, which again would be community, mindfulness, and the value of rituals as we grieve, right? So that we can, because grieving is very, very hard. Losing somebody is so deeply personal, and it's really life shattering at times. So we need one another. You know, we really do need one another. Those are my guiding principles. I would just like to offer that everyone is welcome here, whether I'm going to share my story. I've been grieving the loss of my brother for 40 years. So there is no time limit on grief. I also often felt like I didn't own my grief. I didn't feel validated in grieving. So everybody is welcome here. You never have to defend yourself. You never have to get over anything. You're always welcome here. It's a completely confidential community. It's based on mutual respect and compassion and kindness. And I think the one rule I might really stick to is there's no advice giving. We're not going to say, oh, you should do this, this, or this, or this, or we're really not here to judge or give advice. We're here to bear witness to one another, to sort of walk on that path, to say we're grieving, and we're just going to be with one another the best we can. So I just really want to invite whoever is grieving, whether it's a recent loss or a more distant loss, whether it's a family member, or maybe, you know, the other thing I've learned through grief is sometimes somebody who you don't think is so close to you, their death really affects you. And I really just want to keep an open invitation. Again, you never have to justify why you're grieving. You are 100% welcome here. And so, yeah, you know, grieving can feel so lonely because there's sort of this paradox of you're completely alone. But at the same time, this is a universal thing that we go through, grief. We lose people that we love. So that's again, the part of the community that we recognize that it's very deeply personal, that each loss is so unique to that person. But that we can sort of support each other and contain this sense of community to be here for one another. And one other thing is that, you know, grief does affect our bodies, it affects our minds, it affects our spirits, it affects every part of us, right? And I also just want to invite people to know that they can trust their own inner wisdom, right? Their deep knowing, their deep wisdom, and to sort of trust themselves, and that they can be in this environment safe. You don't have to be anything, right? You can just show up as you are right now, and we would 100% welcome that. Yeah, those are my deepest desires for this group, a group where people feel welcome, feel safe, know that they're not going to be judged, they're not going to be given advice, they can show up as how they want, they don't have to defend that they're still grieving, you know, that they're all welcome.
Absolutely. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Okay. Yeah, that's really beautiful. And if I look at this from through the lens of a systems coach, these three areas that you were talking about, mindfulness, community, and ritual, then what we have there is like the mindfulness piece is kind of, tell me where I'm wrong, Gretchen, but it's kind of going into something a bit more intangible. Some people may call that spiritual, or if that word doesn't work for you, and I think we both agree that if any word doesn't work for you, let's not use it, right? Is so something that mindfulness allows you to access something that's outside of the consciousness, if that makes sense, your conscious mind. So, you know, in Freudian psychology, one might call that subconscious or something like that, or the unconscious, or something that's beyond our thoughts. And then we've got this community here, which is like the place where we all get to dream together. We call that like kind of the dreaming level, where we get to talk it through, we get to work it out, we get to reimagine and just share things as well. Just share things and be together and be in that circle. And then the ritual, to me, this is like ritual aligns with mourning. So grief is the really is the feeling, it's the thing that arrives with the loss, and
Mhm.
then is encased by time, never gets smaller, and sometimes it moves out.
Mhm.
But the ritual is the mourning side of it. So it's creating things in the real world, or what we would call in systems coaching consensus reality, that
Mhm.
we can honor people with, you know?
Yeah.
So just little things like that, even in my daily, I'm just looking at a photograph I've got here of me as a baby being held by my favorite auntie.
Mhm.
My favorite auntie, she was my grandma's sister, but like, not because I was grieving her, but just because I felt like I wanted a bit of support this week. So I
Yeah.
literally put that in my eye line so I can see myself being supported by a lovely woman, you
Mm.
know. So it's these little tricks we can play in the consensus reality in the real world are really important too. And Gretchen has lots of beautiful, beautiful rituals from many different parts of her practices and her experiences. That's right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think when you leave your own culture and go to such a radically different culture like we did, leaving the West to come to Asia, you sort of see, wow, it just became so apparent to me that the honor that the temple placed on death and ancestors was so rich and so beautiful. And it really did help people. It doesn't take away the pain. I mean, to lose somebody is horrible, it's absolutely horrible, but to have sort of these, again, rituals in place,
Mm,
just it does it was a beautiful honoring of the relationship. It's a reinforcement that this person meant something to you. There's sort of something to sort of hold your hand every once in a while. And so yeah, throughout the program I might share them, but also invite people to share what rituals they have, because everybody has rituals whether they know it or not. They're doing rituals that sort of remind them of their loved one. It could be a favorite meal, or driving past a place that they used to go together. Those are rituals too. Again, they don't have to be in a religious context, right? So it could be calling somebody, the day that that person died. That's a beautiful, deeply profound ritual. So this is, again, it's going to be an exchange. Like, we're all going to sort of be saying, this is what works for me, and start sharing. And then you can sort of learn from one another. So I do feel that I did come from a strong religious background, and there were plenty of rituals there. And then I sort of transitioned to a different one. So I think those are our sort of two reference points, but everything's welcome. So, we can be talking about different religions, different cultures, but um, rituals are important, and a lot of them are very private and personal. And then I think another thing that we should acknowledge is that COVID has been a particularly difficult time, because we've lost the communal rituals, which would be a funeral or a memorial, or sort of even just coming together on a birthday when you're experiencing a loss. Sometimes just coming together can be helpful. So that's been particularly difficult, I think, for all of us that have either experienced death during this time, or sort of are sort of on the heels of a loss. This has been particularly difficult. And it just, again, highlights how important rituals are, communal rituals as well as personal. And then again, we each know what's good for us. So if you don't like the traditional rituals, but you want to sort of do a bonfire, do that. Do what's meaningful to you.
mm,
And I think it's been, I've learned through personal experience, but also talking to other people, that we sometimes don't trust ourselves. We think, oh, well, that's silly, I need to do it this way. No, please do what works for you. If this is a way to honor that relationship, to help you on this sort of grief path, please do it. So we both believe strongly in rituals, sort of as, again, a signpost, right?
mm. Lighthouse.
Literally a lighthouse, exactly.
Yeah.
And you're right that the grief is more the inner emotional response to a loss, right? So I think what we've tried to do is sort of triangulate and say, what do we need during grief? One is, really, we have to acknowledge, we have to bear witness to this painful loss. The reality is, it's painful. There's
Yeah.
going to be a lot of emotions coming up with that sometimes manifests as a physical, exhaustion or pain. And so just really honoring that, honoring the grieving part through mindfulness. And again, mindfulness is just an invitation to quiet the mind and be present. And then community, which is, I do feel that we heal in community. And that's and that can sort of be a parallel to, you might feel alone, because the grief is a lonely journey, but you're with people, you're with a community. And then the rituals would be, like you said, the mourning, sort of, it can be almost a more tangible sign of a signpost to help you get through. It won't erase the pain, but it can certainly help you really reinforce those connections, reinforce those relationships, remind you of that person.
Process things a little bit as well.
Mm.
Um, yeah, love that. And I imagine that as a community, as a group, that we would create some of our own rituals as well
Yes,
and borrow from each other. And
yes,
because there's lots of ways that we create this kind of
yeah.
stuff as well. And I'd love to get into a few of those. So I just wanted to also flag a couple of, again, we are our language, whatever we say, we're not going to make anybody follow anything, any words or syntax or anything like that. You can choose your own vernacular around this as well.
Mhm,
So if the word heal, I know some people get a bit triggered by the word healing.
mhm.
I know I had a friend whose mum died actually, and before she died they got like a spiritual healer in, and they were just a charlatan, right? So
Mhm,
she wouldn't have anything to do with the word healing at all.
mhm.
And that's when I was like, I'm not a healer, I'm a dealer. I help people deal with things through coaching. But so that's kind of, again, I would like to flag anything, any word, spiritual, morning ritual, any of these things that don't feel right for you, we will substitute that language for you. Anything is welcome here, right, Gretchen?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And even if you're listening and it doesn't resonate or land well with you, please just change it, interchange it with a word that does have value and meaning to you.
Yeah.
So I agree. The word I want to say that I don't think you can heal from a loss. There's no way to fix the loss.
Mhm.
That's important to me to say. We're not here to fix the loss. So when I say heal, it's healing as a, we are
Continuum.
a continuum of,
Uh-huh.
we are always in healing, and there's these moments of feeling connected, feeling whole, feeling we're understanding one another. That would be healing for me.
Gorgeous.
But by no means does it put a little tiny bow on top and say, I'm done, I'm okay now, I'm okay with this loss, grief is over. Grief, I think for most people, is a lifelong journey. So I do really want to honor that. And then, yeah, absolutely use words that work for you. And absolutely, there's no adherence to dogma or law or rules beyond no advice. I would say that's the only rule I really want to stick to. Yeah, well, I think maybe now we can sort of share. Sarah, do you want to share a little bit about losses you've experienced in your life?
So yeah, I'm happy to do that. And this, it's really interesting, one thing that's coming up here. So you're talking about this on a kind of continuum as
Mm,
well. And like I was really interested to talk about yours then, because like it was that
mm,
40-year period that
yes.
then, and then, when you were in conversation, you realized that a lot of stuff was kind of bubbling up from undealt with or unhealed stuff. And then when it all came out onto the table, it was like, whoosh.
Yeah.
So that was interesting, and that was one of the things that we want, that we were interested in as well. But so and this is what I'm going to use this. I'm going to use a few stories now, this compare and comparison thing, and like what Gretchen was saying about no loss too small, don't worry about that kind of thing, because there's three things I want to flag here. Number one is tribal, well, not tribal beliefs, but like family of origin, or
Mhm.
where you came from, your kind of land of origin beliefs, right? So they can often influence how you feel you can grieve. So I'll tell a little story about that in a minute. And then the second thing is actually grief that happened before you were born, kind of
Mm,
thing as well. So we haven't really touched on this, but kind of generational grief as well. I'll just touch on that because it's very relevant to me in many ways. And
yeah,
then the final thing is to say, I don't have, like Gretchen, if we were in the comparison game here, like if we were in Grief Olympics, which is what the woman who runs Griefcast calls it, the Grief Olympics, Gretchen would win because I haven't lost a brother or mum or a dad or a
mm,
sister or anything like that, right? And that's not what we're here for. And I'm making light of this now
mm,
because, if there's any of that in your mind, like
yeah,
if it was your grandma's dog and you still feel that pain so keenly from 50 years ago or something, come along, because
absolutely.
it's like, it's all, I've got goosebumps thinking about that. So the first thing I want to say, I remember somebody at school, I was really thinking about this really hard before we got on this call. think his name was Richard, and I forget his surname. And my biology teacher came into the class one day and said, please pray for a kid who's in my, he was 2 years younger than me. Please pray for a kid who's in my form. He was taken to hospital last night with meningitis. So please pray for him. We got to school the next day and the whole assembly was called because he died, right? He died overnight. And I can remember I had a sports lesson that morning. I was really, really upset. I didn't really know him. I think I played in orchestra with him or something like that. But I was so upset, really, really upset. I'm very sensitive in that way. But my friend Lisa was really upset and she was crying her eyes out. I think when they were in primary school, they'd been boyfriend and girlfriend or something like that. She was crying her eyes out. And I can remember somebody in the thing, you know what's coming now, going, who does she think she is? She didn't even know him that well, right? That stuck with me for so many years, right? And the irony is that person's somebody I wouldn't even friend on Facebook if they asked me, because they were such a nasty piece of work. Do you know what I mean? But like, actually, I'm just thinking, oh, bless her. There was obviously things going on for her now, so I totally forgive her. And if she wants to friend me on Facebook, it's on. So, but
I think it's important to say that's the culture we're raised in. So you know, we can forgive the individual, but we're raised in this shaming, blaming culture. And who do you think you are? You should be over this. And we're also in a very pain adverse society. We can't bear looking at pain directly, right? So we don't want to be around that. So the way we deal with it is by saying, oh, well, you shouldn't be upset.
Yeah, who are
Why
you?
are you upset? Yeah, and it's very hard to witness pain. So it's very hard to support people who are grieving because it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We want to fix it and smooth it over and put a Band-Aid and move on. So it's always like the people who are saying those things are just hyper uncomfortable with maybe death or pain or suffering, and they can't stand it. But that's the culture we're drenched in. We're absolutely drenched in that, right? You know, it's like, get over it, move on, you're fine.
Shut up. Yeah. Interesting.
So I think, again, we're sort of hopefully going the other direction to say,
yes,
we can sit with your pain. We can bear witness to your pain and your loss as long as you need us to. And that might be a lifelong journey. Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about the relationship between you, because that, like, so obviously not obviously, but I am in a Facebook group for my old school, right? Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, his sister jumped on and said, does anybody remember my brother? Right? I know, right? I'm getting choked up thinking about it, but this relates to your story really strongly, because it's like, does anybody remember my brother? And it's like, oh wow, you forget, don't you? Like, I remember that story, but then you think, well, that she was like 16 or something, I was 15, he was 13, like, and that's all those years later, 30 years later, she's asking, can anybody got anything for me here, you know? So I just dropped in. I think I was in orchestra with him. I was terribly upset.
There's such a fear. I mean, one of my biggest fears was that I would forget my brother. And I would assume it's a fear that you don't want other people to forget, like your friend, that like this sister came in. You want people to remember your loved ones. That's very important. And there is a lot of fear around that I've personally experienced. So I can really recognize that. But if we shame people and try to hide our pain and grief, then we are effectively forgetting them. We're sort of putting it over in a box.
100%. And then like 20 years later, you're in therapy or something, and then it's all allowed to come out and be out there in front of us. And that's what I would like to say is, like, as much or as little as you want to share, if you choose to join us, then as much as or little that you want to share. The second thing that was really interesting to me was that kind of, did I say ancestral first or second or third?
You meant, I don't know which. Yeah.
Anyway, so because this is the interesting thing that happens when we have these conversations, and Gretchen and I have this happen every time we talk to one another, is like new stuff comes out, and new insights come out. So just from me telling that story and from her like adding to it and thinking about that third person who was like so shaming towards my friend, is like, wow, okay, so that's actually just another piece of the puzzle that just put into place for me there as well. And I can remember at my granddad's funeral, I mean, I was upset about my granddad, but you know, it was one of those things. My brother turning to me and going, no drama, cut the drama, or something like that. So I felt I couldn't even cry at my own granddad's funeral. Now, whatever that was with him, I don't know. But, you know, so that was another thing that was like, oh my God, I'm sure I hold that to this day. Forgotten about that too. But yeah, so there'll be none of that here. You know, and those stories are also really, really welcome to the table, because it's like, whew, what's happening next? And you know, there are places for it. I lost, so I've lost obviously all my grandparents now, but one grandparent I lost while my mum was 6 months pregnant with me, literally. So so that's an interesting one for me as well, which I go through phases of kind of exploring that a bit more. And because, you know, I was there when she got the call, and I was there in the room when the police wouldn't let her identify the body because they could see her hump, and then they had to sign papers so that my dad went and identified his body instead. And that was, oh my God, June 18th. So that's tomorrow.
Wow.
And I was born on September the 18th of the same year, right? So that's and I don't know, I mean, there's a lot of kind of what I would describe as unbridled woo-woo around stuff like this, which I'm a little reluctant to go towards, but also want to go towards. But with people who have got integrity, you know, about like what, and also just some straightforward biology, like what does that mean to baby me? I mean, of course, my poor mum as well, you know, and she had to go through the kind of the double whammy madness of both becoming a new mum for the first time and dealing with that at the same time. So God bless her. Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? And his mom, you know, he struggled with depression all his life, and his mum actually died by suicide, and he found her. So that's another kind of interesting thread that goes through like my lineage, and those things feel very interesting to me as well. So which, you know what I mean?
Oh, well, I mean, if I can hop on, you know, I lost my brother when I was 5, and I felt that the response was, you know, just don't talk about it, buck up and move on, right? Which was very painful, and I'll like dig into a little bit more. But, you know, my mother lost her father when she was 7. And as I got a little bit braver later in life, I was like, well, tell me about your father. She basically verbatim was repeating what she had said to me. Well, I was too young. I couldn't remember. You just move on. And it was like light bulbs going off of, this is ancestral. We pass it down. The way she was expected to deal with the loss of her father, then I was expected to deal with the loss of my brother. Right. And you start to see these patterns and you understand, okay. And then you have so much more. That helped me have so much more compassion for my mother, because there was a time where I was very angry with my parents, because I had felt sort of abandoned and neglected. And a lot of children feel that way because their parents are struggling with the loss of another child. So they're in a comatose situation. They're barely surviving, the parents. So the remaining children sometimes feel abandoned. That's quite common. But when you start to understand their own history of loss and their own history of grief, compound with their own loss, you start to just say, okay, like you start to have more compassion and understanding. And actually, for me, it helps me feel that sense of connection that, okay, yeah, we are sort of, again, on this same journey. We're doing it imperfectly. We're stumbling. It's horrible. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but here we are. We're trying to get through these losses together as mother and daughter, as siblings, as grandparents. And I think it's really beautiful that you brought up your grandfather. Of course that affected your mother while you were in her womb. It's just very, very deep. And to have not been able to meet him, you know, there's sort of this, like you've mentioned before, like these ghosts or these shadows in our life. Who was this person that I wasn't able to meet?
Yeah.
You know? So I think that's also a very important, again, I want to create a safe space so people can start looking at these things.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, sort of say, where does this come from? Why did my parents treat me this way? You can sort of start to see the connections.
100%. Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I can feel something lifting and shifting as we speak. I mean, you know, I can remember like one of my earliest memories is being very young, maybe about 5. And my mum starting to talk to me about my granddad, her dad. But it must have felt very edgy for her, because
Uh,
there's so, I mean, like, both of those, losing a parent cracks you open, and having a baby, I'm sure, cracks you up. This is why I hear people telling me I don't have any children, just for the record. Cracks you open as well, especially your first one. And I can remember, like, we were watching television, and these two comedians were singing this old vaudeville song called Underneath the Arches. There's this guy with this long, like, fur coat on and a little straw hat, and they're singing Underneath the Arch. And my mum goes, come on, stand up, stand up. Your granddad used to love this, and he used to sing
yeah.
this. And she got me to stand, and then she just started weeping.
Right.
And I was like,
Yeah.
oh,
What's going on? Yeah.
And I don't know how I reacted. She might be able to remember that, or maybe she doesn't, but I don't remember how I reacted, but I remember seeing that. And then, then this person stops being a specter and starts being a reality to that other person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that story ends. I have no idea, but it's interesting for me to explore that as well. So things like that we can explore in this group
Mm-hmm.
as well, just those kind of interesting stories that come out onto the table. Yeah, so, and again, nothing too long. Like for you, it was 40 years before it really came onto the table.
Well, yeah, I'll just go ahead and share
Please
because
do. Please
um, I'm 45, and my brother died when I was 5, and he was 17 at the time, and it was a car accident. So it's a sudden, sort of violent death, and um, the immediate days and probably weeks following it, I can almost viscerally like re-enter. It's like sealed. I just remember those moments so intensely: smells, sounds, sensations. But then what happened afterwards, I was referring to it before, is I was sort of giving this narrative of, well, you're too little to understand. You don't really miss Chris because you're too little. And it was never said with meanness. Again,
No.
I think it's like, it's too painful to deal with it. So you're fine, right? You're fine. And this culture, I think we're improving. I really do think there's, improvements in mental health and honoring children's emotions. But when I was growing up, it's, oh, kids are resilient, you're fine. And so we've talked about this before too. It's another Buddhist term, but sort of the second arrow. So the first arrow is my brother died. This is a loss. It's tragic. But you have literally no control over it. The second arrow is like the response to the first arrow. And for me, the response was somehow denying that I had experienced a loss. So it was very traumatic for me. And that's sort of the trauma I carried into my adulthood, was this confusion of, I've lost somebody, but people are telling me I shouldn't even matter or care or feel sad about it. And this real disconnect between what I had experienced, which was loving my brother, losing him. And the other thing people used to say to me is like, well, you're too young to understand death. I mean, I've heard that a million times, and it really upsets me even to this day, because I thought, I now know what death is because I'm living through it. I'm experiencing it. So if I didn't know what it was yesterday, I know what it is today. And you have to face that reality, when you lose somebody. And I would sit on our steps waiting for him to come home every single day, just willing him to come home, really, like literally, like just the depths of anguish, just willing him to come home, and sort of slowly understanding he's not coming home. I used to have dreams and wake up, and there would be a nanosecond where I thought, well, is he here? Because your dream, and then the reality would hit me. And again, I'm 5 or 6. I just turned 6, but it's like it was very, very intense and very visceral. But then this sort of story started coming on of you're too young. You don't even know what loss is or death is, and that really was hard for me. And then I always want to say this because I think my parents did an amazing job of keeping the family going. This is the worst.
Because there was 3 of you, right?
Yeah, and my
Yeah.
oldest sister went to college, so there was a gap in age. My parents had started having kids in college, and then I was the youngest. So I was the youngest. And so I have 2 other sisters. But unfortunately, we just stopped talking about my brother. I think it was just too painful. We just stopped talking about him. My mother had like one photo she had sort of like in her desk area, and it always felt like that's her photo. Like, I don't even dare go look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was 1 or 2 family photos that my mom still has up that are portraits. So there are a few photos, but we didn't talk about him much. And I had just, I had never even really grieved him. So it's this unresolved grief that just sort of followed me into adulthood. And it was heavy and there was like a tightness to it. And what happened for me is when my own son was 17, he was living, I live in Japan, and then he decided to go to high school in America, and he had come home for the summer, and my youngest daughter was 5. Is it still recording?
It's being recorded again. Sorry if you just, I just caught the
button. Oh, that's fine. I'll repeat. Yeah.
My little finger. So sorry, this is where you were 5 and your brother was, your daughter was 5 and your son was 17.
Yeah. So again, like my entire, I mean, I couldn't even talk about my brother. And if I tried to, I would almost hyperventilate, really, like I would get sort of hysterical. I have no photos of him. If people said, how many brothers or sisters do you have? I would say 2 sisters and feel like a pit in my stomach. Like, I mean, massively unresolved, probably grief and some trauma. And so when my son was 17, he'd come home from America. My youngest daughter was 5, and she had been looking forward all year to seeing him. And I still really hadn't put too much together of, oh, these are the same ages as myself and Chris. And she had a little festival, like a matsuri to go to, and she was like, Kai has to come with me. You know, she was so happy he was home. And so we went to the festival, and they were walking a few steps ahead of me together. And it, when you talk about something cracking open, I mean, really, truly, everything cracked open for me. It was, and I think that may happen for long-term unresolved grief or trauma, that something triggers you. And for me, it was like a triggering of good and bad, because it was like, oh my God, this is decades and decades worth of unresolved grief and sadness that I've not attended to in any way. But to see them walking together was, and this is when I would use the word healing. It made me feel whole. Of course I loved my brother. Of course I missed my brother. It was very validating to me, which is what I had been seeking for so long, that I deserve to grieve him. I deserve to feel sad, and that relationship was real and loving and wonderful. And so, and I would say that was, I was very aware after that experience, which was very emotional. I mean, I felt like time and space stopped, you know, it was like, yeah. And I 100% knew my brother was there with me, you know, maybe in molecular form, like it doesn't matter what, but it was like, oh,
well, his DNA is literally part of your kid's DNA as well.
Oh, that too, that sense of he's living in them. I mean, again, when we talk about ancestors, it's like, oh, here they are, you know. And for me, becoming a mother was always sort of this, again, spiritual, take it or leave it word, journey for me. That was sort of something that really was meaningful in my life. And I thought, this led me here to this moment, to finally, and then what I wanted to say is, I think I started grieving that day. Really, truly. So yeah, it wasn't like, oh, I'm done, I'm okay now. And I was very, very upset for a few weeks. And I was telling my kids this story saying, you know, and I was sort of thanking them saying, you guys got me to this point. But I mean, I couldn't even say it without crying. And so, and I did, I thought, now I can start healing. And now I can start recreating a relationship. And I didn't understand that death doesn't have to stop the relationship. Up until that point, it was like, he was gone, don't talk about him. You didn't even, you know, suffer from his loss. And now it's like, I can start grieving, and I can start talking to him, welcoming him into my life, seeing him in my children, like little gestures they did. So for me, it was the beginning of grieving, and, you know, very much brought on by seeing my son and my daughter at the exact same ages, which I hadn't even put together, because again, it was such like a shut down part of myself. And so that's when I started to really start to grieve. And then I did put sort of effort into it, because I thought, wow, I really need to attend to this. And so, I mean, I think I'm in a good environment for it, though, because I am at a place, my husband is a priest, and we, you know, I meditate, I would go on retreats. I was going through different rituals that sort of had all of this new significance to me. So I could sort of view it differently. Like every summer we clean the tombstones for temple, well, members of the temple who can't clean it themselves, either from old age. And it just brought on this whole new significance for me of how we care for one another, that, you know, after death, we still support each other and we clean the tombstones. And so there was, everything just was sort of had new significance and meaning for me. And then when you and I met, I was sort of at this very critical time because I felt like I was getting closer and closer and closer to the core of my grief and really trauma. So we're sort of talking about two different things here. But I would say the trauma
Oh
is
no,
that
traumatic.
second, well, the second arrow of you don't have a right to this grief. That's what caused me a lot of that pain. And I was really getting quite scared because I thought I was getting closer and closer. I was sort of getting closer and closer. I was talking about it with my husband. I asked my parents a lot of questions that I was never able to ask before, which I sort of offered before. It was starting to let me into how they were doing their best, but they didn't know what to do. And so I was starting to reach out to more people. But I was still quite scared. It sounds weird, but I was really scared. I was so afraid that when I got to the sort of center of my grief, that what everybody had been telling me was true, that in fact, I can't remember my brother. There wasn't a relationship. I was too little to understand. And I had this real fear, like the closer I got to sort of this core of it. And then finally, I was able to sort of get to that point. And what really surprised me is it was the complete opposite. It was this, I felt like I had actually been the one to bear witness to his death, that I was sort of the elder standing by, the veil pulled completely back, because as a child, you're so innocent and you don't have ways to hide, right? That, and I thought those immediate days and weeks after his death, I was so present. I was so present. And so finally, I got to this point of saying, you were there, you were bearing witness for him, you were helping him again cross into this other place, because I was so present, and it was so raw, and it was so painful. And it was very beautiful for me, very, very beautiful for me. And I do think grieving is a lifelong journey, but for me, I would say that part was healing. So that's different. That was healing that second arrow of a story that I had been believing that wasn't true. The loss is always there. The sadness is always there, that, you have to, um, carry your whole life. But it was like, for me, that part, and for me, that was through sort of the mindfulness, the community, the support, the rituals, which is sort of the elements I wanted to bring to this group. And so now I have photos of my brother around the house. I talk about him more. I feel like I have an actual relationship with him. It's just completely different. I can talk about him. I was able to visit his grave and have, which I couldn't even do before. I was too afraid to go to his grave. It was too scary and overwhelming for me. So really, that's a very big case of unresolved grief, of what happens when you don't sit with it. And of course, I was a very young child, so that's a unique way to enter grief. But I felt like his loss, so there was sort of half of me that was, it influenced my worldview, as I was very aware that death was part of life, like very, very aware. There was sort of an immediacy and intimacy about it. But then there was also this massive disconnect, right? That when there was loss, I would disconnect. So it sort of was a blueprint for how I faced other deaths in my life. And when other people that I was close to died, I really did sort of disconnect, turn off, and you feel very untethered. You feel like, for me, I feel just sort of floating around, and you don't feel connected. And I think that's what I was trying to, I guess, say before, is the connections are what help us. And when you feel completely disconnected and untethered and you disassociate from a loss, it's very painful and it's very lonely. And I wouldn't want that for anybody. But that's how I approached all the losses after my brother. And then really quickly, I just want to add that my cousin died last August, and he actually moved in with us when I was 7. Him and his mother, who's my aunt, moved in with us. And in many ways, he became my big brother. We were very close growing up. And then he lived with us for a few years, and then they moved out of the house, but nearby. And then he died last summer in August. And it happens to be Obon in Japan, which is a very, like, a holy time for Buddhists, because you believe your ancestors are coming to visit you.
So it's another death ritual. It's another death ritual.
Yes.
Every single year, to honor the ancestors, they come back and then they leave on vegetable animals,
Yeah.
which is the most delightful thing, right? Seasonal vegetables made into wee horses and things.
To
Yeah.
help them cross over to visit.
And
And
yeah.
it's a beautiful, beautiful time. And again, when I first came here, I had such discomfort. It's, you know, when you're discomfort, but you're drawn to death. I was always like curious about death, but hyper uncomfortable around it, that weird mixture. I've grown to really love Oban. And then my cousin died, which was sudden and very difficult. But I was sort of in this suspended time of being at the temple during Oban. And so I had all this structure. I put my husband chanted for him, and my aunt is Catholic, but I said, would you mind if, you know, Keno chants? And she was very happy, and he chanted for him. We had photos of him up and I was so present. And I thought, again, it doesn't take away the pain. It doesn't. You're not going to fix it. You've lost somebody you love. And I mean, the horror is so visceral, but it was like to have that structure, and sort of, quite honestly, time, just sort of a quiet time to sort of say, I am grieving here. And there was two moments. One where I was just sitting outside, you know, I think it was either the day or the day after he had died. I was just sitting there, and again, feeling honored that I can take up the space and time and grieve him. And a dragonfly landed on my knee because I was sitting outside. And I think a lot of people talk about butterflies or different insects visiting, you know. And again, I don't like when people are dismissive about that, because for me, it felt like he was coming to me. And this dragonfly, and they are known to do this, he just sat on my knee for a very long time, a very long time. It was so, for me, comforting.
Yeah.
You know, it was like Dan's visiting me. And I'm not gonna feel silly saying that. You know, I really felt like he was visiting me. And I could tell my husband, and he's not gonna laugh at me. I can tell my children. And then I told my other cousin, who was very close with him. And now we both look for dragonflies. Whenever we see dragonflies, we'll send a text, oh, I saw a dragonfly. You know, to me, that's very beautiful, and it connects
us. Part
us.
of the ritual, and it's part of the mourning process, and it's part of making something so intangible tangible, and bringing it into the consensus reality, and then sharing that with people, which I think is part of what this community is about.
I did feel like held, you know, by this time to sort of be present with this loss, and my own emotions, my own everything that was coming up. I was, you know, because now I had sort of had this mindfulness practice, I had sort of started to grieve my brother more like directly, that I was sort of able to be present with my cousin's death. And now it's like he liked Dr. Pepper, right? So this is one of these silly rituals that in Japan you have an altar and you put the food that they like, right? So it tends to be fruit and rice and things like that. But he liked Dr. Pepper, and where I live is very rural. I have no idea where to find Dr. Pepper, but I was like, I'm going to find Dr. Pepper. And I took two of my kids with me, and it ended up being a very joyful morning looking for Dr. Pepper, because Danny loved Dr. Pepper. And it was a way for me to share something about him that's so small and silly, but he always was drinking Dr. Pepper. And we finally found it at Yamaya. I mean, I live a good hour from like the city. So we found it at Yamaya, and my daughter was like, there's Dr. Pepper, you know, because all these places. And it was like in the back shelf, like dusted. And there it is. I brought it back to the temple. We put him at the main altar. We are lucky that we have all these altars, you know, with the Dr. Pepper, you know. And then my mother-in-law was like, why Dr. Pepper? I'm like, oh, he loves Dr. Pepper. And there's all these little stories, because again, I lived with him as a kid, you know, and it was like, it binds you to people. I want my kids to know about my cousin, you know, even if it's Danny loves Dr. Pepper, you know, and having that, looking for the Dr. Pepper ended up becoming something that was really meaningful for me.
You know, and as you're saying this, Gretchen, I can even see in this group, now I'm part of the Dr. Pepper Club, right? And then it could be like, oh my God, there's some Dr. Peppers, take a photograph, send it to you. Like, I just saw some Dr. Pepper. And then this is how the community works. This is how the Lighthouse works. This is how we we mark, and it's just little things in daily life. And I think, you know, obviously in the context of the temple, it's been ritualized a lot, so that, you know, you were talking about the cleaning of the gravestones, and so you clean the gravestones for the people who get too old to clean their own ancestors'
Yeah.
gravestones, but then you get invited into it, so it's not just intergenerational off your lineage, you
Right.
become part of that lineage in a more kind of community way. It's a lot of stuff in Japan is very unspoken but understood in the context, and I think that you and I probably have just like 1 degree of that where we can go, oh yeah, but I
Mhm.
think it's better to explain it a bit more, is that kind of, and what we would love to build here as well is that sense of, now I become part of your Dr. Pepper lineage, so I
Mhm.
may not be cleaning the gravestone on Obon, but what I may be doing is, when I'm in Yamaya and I see Dr. Pepper, I become part
Yeah.
of yours because I take a photograph or say, or if it's dusty in the back, I might give it a little dust, you
Yeah.
know, and it's just
Yeah.
that way to keep that alive and to make that alive in a community, in that, on that sangha together, whatever that means.
Yeah.
That those lighthouses that show us, that just warn us or remind us, or if we've got too close to the grief and fallen apart completely, which is also completely fine,
Yeah.
that there's some refuge and there's some way to be picked up and to be held by people who are also there in a very, very clear way. Another thing that I love about the rituals that you talk about in the temple is that your husband visits
Mhm.
people. Can you
Yeah.
say a little bit more about
Yeah.
that as well?
Yeah, this is so beautiful. And people always say, what does your husband do? And it's, imagine your entire life tending to people in this way.
Wow.
So every day he visits probably about 15 homes. And each home, you actually, if I am honest, is usually the matriarch or patriarch, you would, or someone who's died recently. So you can choose the day, either the day they died or their funeral day, because when you pick an auspicious day for their funeral, so you pick a day, either the actual day of their death or the funeral day. And then that day, so if it's the 13th, my brother died on the 13th, he would visit our family home every 13th. And
Of the
now
month.
it's of the month, yeah,
Mhm.
forever,
Yeah,
forever.
amazing.
And then at your home, this is traditional, you know, people are starting not to have these things, but where we live is very traditional. They have a small butsudan, which is an altar, and then you open it up and there's candles and then usually photos. So who, only people who have died, you put their photo there. And then again, food that they may like. It could be tea. A lot of people put sake.
Yes.
Um, again, fruit. And then you can eat the food later, by the way. And when people leave an offering for their loved one at our temple, because we have a temple for each member at the temple. I mean, we have an altar for each member. And they can come to the temple anytime and put an offering. Then we wait a day or two and then we eat it, which again is like
Mm.
they're supporting us, right? So there's again this bond of we're honoring their ancestor, their loss, and then that food sort of literally nourishes
And it
us.
kind of
So
shares, it nourishes you, but
very
it also
shared.
feel like it's like sharing the loss or the grief, or I
Absolutely.
don't know. It's just that, it's the
It
community
is.
end of this, it's the circle end of this, right?
It's absolutely, it's sort of like I can't take away the pain, but I can be here to help you carry the weight, you
Mm.
know. um and so when my husband goes into this house, you know, so he goes to the houses every single day, he's out there doing that now. He does a chant for them and then lights candles and then they just talk. It could be about nothing or it could be about the person. And he does this every single month for every single member forever. And I just think it's incredibly beautiful that he goes into their home, and they know, again, knowing once a month someone's going to come and pray and chant for this person that I love very much, you know, usually for their peace. And you can talk about anything with him. And then Buddhism is very into days, but they have a lot of memorial days too. So 1 year after, 7 years after. And again, I asked my husband, why are these, they sort of seem arbitrary, but he said, it's so you don't forget. It's so you don't forget. So they sort of increasingly get longer, but just enough that you don't forget that you have to come together. and go to the temple. Well, you don't have to, but you come together, you do the chanting, you do the prayer, you have the lunch together, so you don't forget. And
Yeah.
I help out. I'm not the priest, but a lot of times it's so beautiful to see little kids, elderly people sharing stories, talking about the weather, interspersed like your story about your grandfather who you never met. Like, I'm sure it's so wonderful to hear stories about our ancestors. I mean, it's
I
just
asked my
really
dad
fun.
actually. I asked my dad about my granddad. It was his father-in-law, and he's able to just tell me a lot of things about him. Like he was a very, very depressed man, so he's able to talk about him a lot, like how much fun he was, but also like how he would just sit weeping at the table in front of his son-in-law and his brother-in-law, just like weeping about what a terrible person he was and all this kind of stuff. And I just thought, wow, it's a bit more sensitive with my mum to ask about that kind of stuff, but like and I do from time to time because I'm super curious, and I actually think that one of the reasons why we're offering this community is because you were telling me about this visiting, and I was like,
Yeah,
I would love to do that for
yeah.
people, somehow just mark it. Not only that, but one of my beloved clients also just said she got really depressed on the month that her father had died 10, 15, 20 years prior, and it was a terrible month for her. And I said to her, well, why don't we do something? And we started to create this kind of like an advent calendar of what that month would look like. So it's actually the time now that I'm going to check in with her to make sure she's started to prepare for it.
Yeah.
And then she brought that into the group that we have together and talked about that. So then other people can do that around the months that they need some support as well. So and it might not just be about grief. It might be just that there's a certain season change that isn't good for you or something like that. So but like definitely around grief and marking those occasions and allowing that to happen, and allowing it to come in, because I still, revisiting that story I told you earlier about school, I can still have those thoughts about like, wow, oh well, he was old, or oh never mind, they were, but it's like I have to check myself, because there's something beneath that which is like, no 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 no, this goes on and on and on and on. And that, like, tending to people's lives, the scientist in me is very interesting to know where these Buddhist rituals came from in the first place. So your husband says like, oh, they never forget, but what I imagine is like the elders of the village, or or wherever it was, like 10,000 years ago, sitting around together and looking and going, oh well, that woman lost her baby, when was it? Oh, it was seven sun oh, she seems to be going off a little bit now. Wait a
Yeah.
second. This has happened to so many people in the village. Hang on a second. I think we might need to do something every 7 years to make sure people can still function in the village. I don't know. I love these ideas. And I
Absolutely.
can't say that's
Yeah.
not right or wrong.
No, but you're right. It's like, people forget. You think, oh,
Yeah.
it's been a few years. And then they're saying, no, it's 7 years. Let's make sure.
Yeah.
Just yesterday, I was taking a walk, and there's 5 big stone markers. I live in a peninsula, and they're from earthquakes.
Yeah.
And we had a big tsunami here about 30 years ago that killed over 100 people. And yeah, I know it's actually really, really fascinating, quite terrifying.
Death
But
is ever present in Japan as well. Ever present.
they have these big,
Yeah.
huge stone markers saying, be careful, don't build down here, reminder. And it literally is for your the future generations, saying, look, be careful, there's earthquakes, don't forget that there's these earthquakes, and then tsunamis, because we live right on the coast. And it's like that. It's like saying, like, we're going to have these times built in for memorials, so we don't forget. Don't forget what this person meant to us. We are checking in. Oh, okay, honestly, it's also, we're checking in on each other.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, how are you? Are you okay?
Yeah.
Like checking in on one another. So
Yeah.
I think there's a deep, deep wisdom in these times and rituals.
Yeah.
And it's okay to embrace them and sort of work them into our own lives. And again, I want to keep reiterating, it's not that the pain necessarily goes away, but we're sort of, again, resourcing and having ways, even when you were saying, like, it's not just the time of year, but I'm going to be honest, like when my boys started driving, I was very nervous. And then I thought, of course I'm nervous, but I didn't put my finger on it for a while. I mean, it's amazing how blind you can be to your own fears and anxieties and triggers. And I thought, of course,
Yeah.
scary for me.
And here's a funny thing as well. If you hadn't been willing over the last 5 years, let's say, since that time when you saw your son and daughter walking down the street together like that, and you were like, whoa, right? If you hadn't brought Chris out present into the thing, you may have just put that down to just like general anxiety, or you may have just put that down to, well, why wouldn't, that's just the way mothers are, you know, or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Whereas you can now go, of course, of course I'm nervous about that, because I have the evidence. Actually, it's not, this isn't something in my mind, this isn't anxiety, this is an evidence-based concern. And then you can deal with that in a different way. And I think, if I may, that relates back to like the biggest, worst grief I had, which I'll just very quickly note, because the reason, and also the reason these are very taboo things, and we and I want to put those out there as well. But there's also like the death that really, like, when I really understood grief, really, and it's only now that I'm reflecting on it, it's like that's what it was. And I still feel a bit of a fraud talking about this, Gretchen, which is really interesting, because it was awful. Was my friend, very good friend, who was about 30, died on September the 11th, 2001. And he was my he was like a brother to me. We lived together, and then of course after we finished university we went our own separate ways, but we stayed close. And when he first got engaged, he asked me to be his bridesmaid, and he was like my love. And before I got his, you know, I would send him a postcard or Christmas cards and stuff like that, and then he'd call me. And so we kind of kept in touch every year. And the last time that I got an email from him was, I think, August 18th, 2001. So it's just the month before. But isn't it funny that I feel like I need to qualify all that?
I know.
To validate my grief.
So
and I genuinely do feel like that. And that is something very surprising to me as I tell you this, right? Because and that's exactly what we don't want people to feel. But what I can tell you about that was that so of course, you know, I can remember going out, and of course the time differences are different, and then getting an email from my friend, I think we were still on dial-up then, saying, oh my God, isn't it terrible? And I emailed her back, my best mate, she was in England, and said, like, what? Because we'd been out to dinner at some local, you know, La Pausa or something like that, or, you know, one of these like Japanese, like Italian restaurants. And she said, she was really angry with me. Oh my God, do you not know what's happening? And I was like, no. She said, turn on the news. So I turned on the news, and I was like, oh my God. And then I was just like, oh my God, Jeff, is he okay? So I emailed him. And of course, you email thinking, of course, out of all the millions of people in New York, he's going to be okay. I know he's not based in that area. He worked for Reuters. And then, like, my 30th birthday was around that time, and we celebrated that weekend. And then on the Sunday, I think my birthday was on a Tuesday, this was the Sunday following that, I hadn't heard anything at all. But I was scouring all the newspapers and everything, and then I saw in the Guardian his name came up as somebody who died. And I can remember literally going like this, like that's how it felt. And then just being like, so I don't know, it felt like I'd been in an explosion or something like that. Like when you see it on the television, my chair went back like that, and I was like, I don't know what to do. And I went for a walk around my neighborhood, and then I tried to go and talk to somebody and said, like, my friend died. And they were like, were you close to him? That was their first question. And I was like, I need to get out of here, because that's not the question. Like, but people don't know, do they? They don't get it. And then just like every single day from there for the next month maybe was just getting up and then calling my friend and saying, I've seen in the paper that Jeff was killed in September the 11th. Do you think it's true? And she was like, yeah, I do. I think it's true. I think it's probably true. And then like just every day I would wake up in the morning, go online, scour to get any information that I could, then go to work where I worked in kindergartens and be like, heads, shoulders, knees and toes. And all I was doing all day was just wait until I could go home and cry my eyes out, and that's it. And one person was amazing, actually, Carla. So I was walking home one day, and it came over me as I was on the way home. And so I was just like crying out loud, but trying to go down the side street so nobody would see me. But I bumped into my friend's husband, and he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, this happened." And then she came over, and she was really good. Yeah. And she looked after me and just let me talk about it. And she was really, really good. And that's the thing, isn't it? That I think is really important to have those people in your life, but it has a massive impact on you when somebody that young goes, one of your peers, because I feel like the impact on me is I'm waiting to die. Like, that's not like, it's a funny thing, and it impacts me in so many ways. Sometimes I'm quite reckless. Sometimes it's hard for me to grasp a future and stuff like that, because that wasn't the only death that happened. Like, that was a terrible public thing, and I don't get super upset every year anymore. And then I got an email from him. So then, like 2 days later, around my 30th birthday, which, like, everybody took me to the local state gusto, and all I wanted to do was just finish my wine, get home, and start crying again. Just start grieving. I just needed to grieve. And but it was his fiance saying, "Do you have any idea where he is?" But that was like, I mean, that was like, it was just so discombobulating. Can you imagine? I actually got an email from him. It said his name, Jeff, blah blah blah, and then it just was like, anyway, that was terrible. And I still dream about him. And he was half Malaysian. His mum was Malaysian, and his dad was English, a white man. And so if you like, so the how he looked from the back, many people in Tokyo look like that, right? So I can sometimes, I see him out the corner,
you see him, yeah,
and stuff like that, and I still dream about him, but I appreciate that when I dream about him. And then just like, and then about 2 or 3 years later, I did actually go and check the dates on this, but as a run up to this, another friend who was kind of connected to him actually, because they came from the same hometown, was found dead on his bathroom floor in Thailand, where he lived. And then another friend, and that was like another, like, get an email saying, "Don't open this if you're not feeling good." And then it was like, oh my God. And he was a very good friend as well. He was one of my friends group at university. And then another friend who was another very good friend was murdered in his bar that he had in Cambodia. He ran a bar in Cambodia, and a drug addict broke in and started to stab his girlfriend, and then he came in, stepped in, and then he was stabbed to death. And that was 3 within about the space of 5 years, all about the same age as me, and all good friends. And it just kind of, I don't know, I still don't, I probably need some therapy about this, but it's still, it's still, it has a really massive impact on you. Like, my mum's friends, like, now like 10 years ago, started kind of dying. And she'd be like, "Oh, Sarah, you just don't know what it's like when your friends start dying, who are your peers." And I'm like,
I know.
I'm pretty sure I've told you these things. Very strange, isn't it? Like, that it's not right. That's out of the natural order of things. And I think, again, like, I say this because I want to be really transparent, is for a couple of reasons. One, we're not going to ask you how close you were to anybody.
Yeah, you don't have to prove.
No.
And
I still feel like I do.
I know. I just want to say that's our culture. That's our culture.
Yeah.
And we're going to unlearn that culture in this community. You don't have to defend your grief, the timetable, how close you were, if it impacted you, if somebody's hurting more. None of that. None of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really feel that. I really feel that, because that's putting up so many obstacles and keeps, it keeps us in a dark place.
And so much pain.
So much pain, yeah.
And so much unnecessary, I don't know. And that's, I think, what the beautiful thing about the way that we grieve in Japan is as well, is that kind of, I think we all have that. There's the mourning periods, and we all get to be able to be part of that somehow as well. And also you get to see the body in Japan as well. Of course, we haven't been able to do that. But so that's kind of those were the three ones that have had a lasting impact on me, actually. And I think there's, I think for anybody who's interested in becoming part of this community with us, we're on the journey with you.
Yes.
We're not where the vacuum that our old religions left in the, certainly in the Western world, or if things are moving out now, is there are charlatans who can step into that space and take advantage of those vulnerabilities, and we are not that. We're not that at all. I can't describe that to you enough. Like, I haven't just shown my story in order that I can trauma bond with you and draw you into something and then sell you my vitamins, or my like bing, or my like Buddhist bing stuff, or whatever it is. The reason that we've opened this up, and let me be very clear, this will be a paid thing because we're both professionals. That's the clarity I want to have about this. But at the same time, like, we're not starting a religion. You don't need to like devote yourself to anything besides your own grief, and we will be there to hold all of that. So whether it was your nan's cat, or the woman up the road who was so nice to you, or like me, it was 3 peers who died in very quick succession, and has obviously left something undone, unhealed, if you like, undealt with, well, just surprisingly, there it is. Like, there's obviously some kind of collateral, or collateral's a good word, you call it the second arrow. I saw a third arrow in what you were telling me before as well.
There are, yeah.
I mean, multiple arrows.
Well, this is a good chance to sort of go into the content.
100%. Let's do it.
Yeah, I agree. We don't have answers. We're not going to fix anything. There's no hierarchy. So even though Sarah and I have created this program, it is sort of a circular, like, we're on the journey with you. And I do think we're going to keep the community small, so it sort of organically grows. It's like, whatever is needed, we're going to, hopefully show up and provide that. So it's going to be sort of a give and take. It's not just like, follow our 1, 2, 3 step and you're going to be fit. No, we're here to sort of organically go through this together. We're walking with each other. We're sort of on this journey. And then I have created some content that, again, is always open for sort of engagement. And I'll just go over it quickly.
Thank you.
So we are hoping to make this a 6-month program, because, again, I think the time to sort of get to know one another, and you can maybe go a little bit deeper, or go in an obscure direction, or just sort of attend to whatever's coming up, sometimes needs time and space. And then we'll have a 90-minute Zoom call. And then throughout the month, we'll sort of have other elements. But during the 90-minute Zoom call, the basic flow would be, after a brief welcome, I would do a guided meditation. And each guided meditation is an invitation, again, to quiet your mind, quiet your body. And then it might relate to the topic of that call. And then we're going to open it up to, discussing whatever theme we've chosen, and then have a lot of time for group discussions, like a good 45 minutes. And then we might break those up into smaller groups, so each person can really have the time to talk. And again, one of our foundations is like compassionate listening. So we're listening to one another. We're not sort of planning what we're going to say. We're not planning how we're going to give them advice. We're just 100% listening. And then at the end, I'd like to give sort of a journaling sort of assignment. I don't know a better word, but something that they can journal during the month off. And again, that could be open, it could be creative, it could be different questions. So hopefully each month we'll sort of approach it differently, but just something that you can sort of bring back into your daily life that you can work through during the month. And then we'll regroup once a month. And then each month I've chosen somewhat of a topic or theme, just again as an anchor, sort of a place to start with. So the first month would be honoring loss and grief. I just think that's really important from the beginning, that we're here to witness each other's grief and give everybody an opportunity to talk about the loss that they're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And the second month would be resourcing and taking refuge. Mm-hmm. This is sort of everybody, again, we all have sort of this deep knowing, something that we know can provide refuge and resourcing. So we're going to sort of be, again, exploring what resources, what kind of refuge can we create for ourselves that may be helpful. And then the third month would be dealing with difficult emotions. This is really, really the core of mindfulness. And there's a great meditation called RAIN, which some people are familiar with, but it's sort of, how do you allow space to be with really difficult emotions? It's very hard. We tend to either ignore them, deny them, or get really wrapped up in them. So it's sort of like, how do we create this balance to be present with a difficult emotion without labeling it, without judging ourselves? Oh, I can't believe you're feeling angry again. I can't believe you're getting emotional again. So it's a very compassionate sort of spaciousness of how can we be with these very, very difficult emotions. And then the fourth month is addressing secondary losses. And this just reminded me of, Sarah, what you're talking about is when you lose somebody that's your age, that's sort of on the brink of adulthood, and just, it really screws with your head.
Yeah.
It really does. And there's so many secondary losses. I mean, ripples. I mean, I know my brother's loss really affected my parents' relationship. It affected my relationship with my sisters. These are lifelong struggles, right? So there's so many secondary losses. It could be
and the friends, they sometimes pop up, don't they?
absolutely.
Or people who were at school or stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's just so many sort of ripple effects. And a lot of them you would have never expected, or they might happen 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, you know. And there's just so many. So I really want to have an opportunity to talk about those and just, again, really give space for them. Then the fifth month is redefining our relationship with our loved one or friend or the person we've lost. Because, again, for me, I had this misconception that they're gone, the relationship's over. And I just really want to, and maybe everyone's already on this path, but just sort of, what does this relationship look like? We can redefine it. We can still be in relationship with the person we've lost. And then the final one is, I really just want to revisit the sense of community and what community and connection means for us, because there is no end to grief. There's no fixing it. But what does connection mean? What does community mean for one another? I think both of us are both very flexible and fluid, and we're sort of, inviting engagement with people who join this. So those are sort of starting off points, and I really welcome them to take any direction. And they'll probably largely be defined by who joins and what they want to say and what they want to share. But hopefully that gives a sense of what the 6 months would look like, and then what the actual Zoom meetings would look like. And then we're really hoping that throughout the month, we can provide different resources throughout the month. So it's not just 1 month and then talk once a month and then we don't talk. We were discussing having a private Facebook page, sharing resources that one another help, having some sort of creative or journaling activities to do, so we can sort of touch base with one another. But I really wanted to have a spaciousness to this group as well, so that the 6 months we can sort of, again, feel a sense of safety, a sense of connection, a sense of refuge, that we know that this is a placeholder, that once a month we're going to show up for one another, and it can sort of evolve from there, and that we can meet each other.
And the word evolution was on the tip of my tongue as you said that, because I think there's this paradox to hold here, which is that you and I do show up as the leaders in this group and with our areas of expertise and skill, okay, which is different to one another. And necessarily, because of this kind of work, it's the same with coaching or even mindfulness, it's not like studying economics or something like that, where you rock up, you do the thing, and then you go back and you show up the next week and you're pretty much stable in between, unless of course you take some action on the economics and then become quite rich or something like that. But is that necessarily because we're processing certain things? Like, I'm changed from this conversation,
me too.
right? Already. And I felt the need after getting after crying there to really God, wow, you know, it's like animals shake after having something, like
Yes,
some trauma
yes,
come up to the
yeah.
surface. So it's like we necessarily are changed through each conversation, through each thing we listen to, through each recording we watch. We are necessarily changed. And so that's where the thread, the golden thread that runs through it is Gretchen's offer here and my skill. But everything that comes around this, the first arrow, the second arrow, the third arrows, all the other different kind of secondary losses will evolve and change and will spiral around necessarily as time goes on. And that's where what Gretchen's called the flexibility comes into this, is that we understand that with each conversation, each time we talk about the people, each time we talk about ourselves, and each time we talk about the grief itself or the mourning or go through a ritual, we are necessarily changed, and to honor and note that along the way. And it's not linear. Like we call it an arrow, but it's like an arrow going round and round and round and up and like around an infinity loop or something, or, you know, so it's and it burns up along the way, or whatever it is. Like there's so many different metaphors that we can talk about here, and there's so many different Japanese rituals we haven't talked about, or Catholic rituals we haven't talked about, or the rituals from your backgrounds or religions or your family or where you're from as well that we haven't talked about. And then there's a whole other set of stuff that both of us, I think, have dipped our feet into, of kind of this is not my area of skill or expertise or even my goddamn business, to be honest, but because I'm a researcher and because I do stuff in the background like indigenous ritual and so on, which I think is interesting as well. I can't teach that, but I can just note it or say what interesting things have come up for me, but that's not something I'm about to kind of appropriate and then deliver back to you at all. I'm a coach.
But I do think that each month we will discuss different rituals.
Correct.
So I think that is important.
Bring it in.
Yeah, that, you know,
yeah,
we've touched this a few times, but it creates structure.
Correct.
And we need that. You know, we need that structure. We need that. We need the community. We need the structure. So that can be there for us.
Almost like an historical record. So in Catholicism, it's done like this, and these are the rituals that go with this. In Islam, from what I've researched, these are the rituals. In Judaism, this is how it happens. In Japanese Buddhist, in Japanese Shinto, and so on.
It's and secular rituals, which are very important too, you know, or personal.
Or in India, and just all those things. And then, you know, there's often threads that run through all those things, like oils or time scales or a certain amount of days, and then certain markings of things, and often fire and smoke is involved. You know, just these kinds of things that you know, we've done a little bit of research in the back. I mean, I think Gretchen's probably got more skill and expertise, not skill and expertise, but knowledge around this than I do right now. But my commitment is that I will do some research around that and then bring some just historical record to the table of different kinds of rituals and the way that people do things. My eye contact's all over the place today. It's like, it's on the camera, it's on you, it's on my hands, it's watching my earrings go like this. It's all over the place, but this is Zoom life, right?
Yeah. Well, I just think we're both really trying to show up in a humble way, you know, with generosity and kindness and compassion. And, but I think I can speak for myself, is I feel like we need places like this for one another. And we want to hold this space for people who would like to have a place to talk about their grief, work through it a little bit, and they will never ever be judged. They won't be told what to do or to hurry up or anything like that. That hopefully it's an incredibly welcoming space that you can show up however you are, from, you know, month to month. There's no expectation set on anybody. So that's definitely at the core of my desire to create this program.
Gretchen, thank you so much for designing and developing this, and for
together, yes, very much
today. Thank you. Today for me to explore where my grief's at. And it feels like it feels like it's on some weird continue. You know how you said you can visit that girl on the stairs?
Yeah.
Like I just was that girl in the
In the
room.
alley. Yeah,
That's,
I felt
yeah,
that too.
it's just so, it's such an interesting set of human
Hmm.
experiences. Yeah, let's see what happens, and we can explore those things together as well, while you and I show up in our skill as well, and
Yeah.
whoever decides to show up shows up in there. So thank you very much, Gretchen. This is
Oh, thank
maybe
you,
a little
Sarah.
taster of what you can imagine. Who knows, maybe Gretchen and I will have like conversations and record them and then post
Yeah.
drop them into the group in
We like to
between,
talk.
so who knows, so thanks, Gretchen. I think this is a good
Thank you,
place for us
Sarah.
to wrap up. Yeah. Okay, thanks everybody for
Thank
watching,
you.
and
Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you, and we hope you, if you feel called to, do join us, or at
Yeah.
least start a conversation with us. Okay, bye.
Bye.